Sometimes you hear a David versus Goliath story that's just almost too wild to believe. Well, we're about to dive into one of the craziest underdog stories in all of military history. It's called the Winter War, and it's all about how a tiny nation took on a massive superpower armed with, well, mostly snow and skis. So let's just paint a picture here. On one side, you've got the Soviet Union. We're talking a military giant, almost 500,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks, a massive air force, the whole shebang. And on the other side, you've got Finland, a small country whose best weapons were skis, sniper rifles, and just this incredible will to protect their homes. I mean, the odds weren't just bad, they were laughable, seemingly impossible. All right, so the year is 1939, and the Soviet Union basically decides, that tiny neighbor we have? Let's crush them. The plan was supposed to be simple, a quick, brutal invasion. Get in, get it done, overwhelm Finland before anyone could even blink. Just think about that number for a second. 450,000 soldiers. That's the force the Red Army put together. They were so confident, so sure that this would be enough to just roll over Finland in a few weeks. A quick, clean win. That was the plan. And their strategy was classic textbook stuff, really, just brute force. The idea was to send in these huge armored columns, thousands of tanks just punching a hole right through any Finnish defenses. It was all about pure, overwhelming power. But here's where things get interesting. As the Red Army rolls across the border, this supposedly unstoppable force meets an enemy they just weren't ready for. And it wasn't the Finnish army, not at first. It was the Finnish winter. We're talking brutal, unforgiving cold. Temperatures plunging to minus 40 degrees. Yeah, that kind of cold. So that's the big question, right? How in the world does a ghost, an army you can barely even see in the snow, stop thousands of tons of steel? How do you stop a tank? Well, the answer? It's as brilliant as it is absolutely brutal. This is where the Finns pull out their secret weapon. And no, it wasn't some new supergun or a massive bomb. It was a strategy, a way of thinking that came from knowing their homeland inside and out. They called it the Matti tactic. It's honestly beautiful in its simplicity. Matti is just the Finnish word for a pile of logs, like you'd stack for firewood. And that's exactly how the Finnish soldiers saw the huge Soviet columns. They looked at them like one giant log, and their whole plan was to just chop it into small isolated pockets, these mottis, and just leave them there, stuck in the snow. So picture this. You have Finnish soldiers on skis. They're basically ghosts moving silently through these thick forests. They'd find a long column of tanks stuck on a narrow road, and they'd hit the tank at the very front and the one at the very back. Boom, the entire column is trapped. Hundreds of soldiers, tons of equipment, completely stuck. And then the Finnish soldiers just vanish. They melt back into the forest, cut the supply lines, and then they just let the winter do its work. And just like that, the Soviet Union's biggest strength, this huge, powerful army, became its greatest weakness. Suddenly, all those tanks were just useless metal boxes stuck on a road. And all those soldiers, they were just thousands of hungry mouths to feed, with absolutely no food coming in. The result was horrific, just devastating for the Soviets. They were trapped in these pockets, these mattis, with no food, no fuel, and not even the right clothes for the cold. Entire divisions of the Red Army, they literally froze to death right where they stood. The numbers are just mind-blowing. The Soviets lost over 120,000 men, an absolutely insane price to pay for what was supposed to be a quick little invasion. And the Finns? Well, their losses were tragic, of course, but it was around 26,000. It's just a tiny fraction of the damage they dealt out. I mean, just look at this. This chart says it all, doesn't it? The difference here isn't just a gap, it's a canyon. It's the perfect picture of just how devastatingly effective Finland's strategy really was. So yeah, the outcome was pretty clear. Against all odds, this tiny nation did the impossible. They didn't just survive, they handed a superpower one of the most embarrassing and costly defeats you can imagine. Okay, so what do we take away from this? What's the real lesson here from these ghosts on skis? Because it's a lesson that goes way beyond just war and battlefields. It really comes down to this. The Finns refused to fight the Soviets' war. They knew they couldn't go tank for tank, man for man. So they didn't. They completely changed the rules of the game. They made the forest their fortress and the winter their weapon. They forced this giant to fight on their turf, in a battle it had no idea how to win. They fought on their terms.
And that really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? I mean, think about the giants in our own lives, in business, in tech, maybe even our own personal struggles. What are the unbeatable challenges we're facing head on? And what would happen if, instead of trying to match their strength, we just completely change the rules of the fight?